That was the president, and him speaking earlier today, signing an executive order punishing any individuals, companies, banks that do business with North Korea, thanking the Chinese for stopping their banks for doing business with North Korea, and an executive order for sanctions on foreign banks that do trade with North Korea, and he wants other countries to do the same. Now, this probably is the next greatest step in this ongoing conflict that potentially could end very, very poorly for the entire world, because there's not a whole lot of good options. Former Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich is with us. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well, and I agree with you. The symbolism of the president meeting both with the Prime Minister of Japan and with the President of South Korea, and then meeting with them together as part of the day in which they were announcing these new, much tougher sanctions, and the strong endorsement of President Trump's United Nations speech from the President of South Korea, I thought was very, very encouraging, and signs that the alliances are coming together to really confront Kim Jong-un in a positive way. I also want to mention for the audience, by the way, that the president's meeting with the president of Afghanistan, was very clear and said the Trump decisions have totally changed the attitude and the tone of what's going on in Afghanistan, and that he has, to a remarkable degree, offered them hope for a successful strategy. It was really quite a strong endorsement.
All right, let me go to what we have discussed in the past, and I agree with you. If this guy keeps firing missiles at Japan or over Japan and threatening Guam and threatening the United States, he has nukes, he's building ICBM capability. You know, you have rightly said that probably the first and most logical military step would be taking any missile right out from the launch pad, or if they fire it, to take it out of the air, which we have the capability of. And then you did suggest, well, really, General Mattis suggested there might be another option that nobody's talking about, because I have been somewhat concerned, thinking there's not a whole lot of good options. You're saying there may be better options.
Well, I think, first of all, I really strongly support, and ever since 2007 have been actively advocating that we have a kill-on-launch strategy, and we say, if you don't let us inspect these, we distrust you so deeply that we are not going to allow you to fire a weapon that could potentially take out an American city. And I think that we have the capacity to kill these on launch, and I think we should exercise that capacity. And then it's up to the North Koreans. I mean, do they react by starting a war, in which case, as General Mattis and the President have both said, they'll be annihilated? I mean, I think this is not a game. People need to understand we're dealing with a very tough dictatorship, which has allowed hundreds of thousands of people to starve to death over the last 2 decades, while it focused its resources on building nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles. And we have to take the steps necessary to get their attention. Something like that, I think, would dramatically change the equation. I also believe that General Mattis has implied, and I'm inclined as an American who's an optimist about how we defend our country, he has implied that there are steps we can take that he's not going to talk about that would enable us to decisively strip Kim Jong-un of his ability to threaten us. And I would not be at all surprised, since lots of smart people and lots of money have been spent for a long time on this problem, if we don't have some very, very secret weapons that will, in fact, disrupt their capacity for command and control.
Yeah, agreed. So he mentioned, he was asked, would this be a kinetic option? And without revealing anything that hasn't been revealed publicly, it's similar to perhaps what we read about that would be debilitating to the United States if a nuclear weapon, for example, just exploded above the continental U.S. in terms of electromagnetic pulse, where everything would be shut down.
That's a possibility. Another possibility is the kind of cyber attack that would make it impossible for their command and control to work. I mean, imagine you're Kim Jong-un and you wake up and the phone doesn't work. So you can't call your leadership and say, I want you to attack the U.S. I mean, there are a number of these kind of possibilities, and we have been working very hard to develop these kind of assets.
Yeah. All right. I want to move on to another issue. I'm watching very closely. We have been far more critical than even some people at the White House as it relates to the conflict of interest of Robert Mueller. And now we see that Mueller actually interviewed the person that appointed him, the Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein. And then, of course, it was his best friend, James Comey, who leaked to the New York Times, which led to the appointment of a special counsel, which is what Comey wanted from the very beginning. And then we've got all of these issues. Now we're finding out, as it relates to surveillance, unmasking and leaking intelligence, that Samantha Powers basically was unmasking a person a day. She's the UN ambassador. Why would she ever need to unmask anybody? And then Ben Rhodes, and then Susan Rice, and then Loretta Lynch. And I'm watching all of these issues. Nobody's investigating, it seems, Comey. Nobody's investigating the conflicts of Mueller. Nobody's looking at the laws that were broken by Hillary, which are numerous. Nobody in the media seems to care about 20% of uranium given to Vladimir Putin and Russia and 145 million kicked back to the Clinton Foundation, which seems like a quid pro quo in my world. Nobody seems in other words, I'm basically looking at no equal justice under the law. I have no faith in institutions any longer, especially media, journalism, if you will. Americans are being fed garbage every day. It seems all ideological, and only one side is being investigated when multiple crimes and felonies are committed by all these other people. Now, I just have a sense of outrage and indignation about it all, because I'm pretty convinced that Mueller's got his sights on Paul Manafort in an indictment, and maybe General Flynn in an indictment. And the only reason Flynn is involved in this is because of unmasking and leaking intelligence. I'm thinking this is the biggest, most corrupt moment in government I've ever seen.
Well, I think there's a lot to that. I think people should be very worried. I was very struck recently. I was reading Tom Rick's book on Churchill and Orwell, and the way in which both of them were against totalitarian regimes, and how Orwell went from somebody who had been sympathetic to the communists to realizing that the communists were in fact as dangerous as the Nazis, and that he wrote 1984 as a warning against totalitarian big government. And I think there's every reason to believe. I'm really surprised that the Congress has not opened up very deep authoritative hearings on what happened, because every point you made is worthy of a congressional hearing. Why would the ambassador of the United Nations be unmasking people? What was her reasoning? What's her defense? I mean, she should be brought in front of some committees and asked to justify why she was putting American citizens at risk and asking that they be identified. Well, I think I've had a number of friends in the last 24 hours write me and say this is the most frightening example of an authoritarian state beginning to emerge, in which the intelligence community and the Justice Department were apparently both politicized by the Obama administration to such a point that they were willing to violate the rights of individual Americans for political purposes. And I think that's exactly what you're looking at. We saw it with the IRS, where we have clear evidence that's what happened. I think we're now seeing it was happening at the CIA, which, if you think about it, is really scary.
What I'm seeing is it's very evident now that an opposition party was surveilled during a political campaign. And what we're also seeing very clearly is that the powerful weapons of intelligence have been used for political purposes, nefarious purposes, and in an unconstitutional way, because it totally eliminates all constitutional Fourth Amendment protections that we have.
No, that's exactly right. And if you have both the FBI and Justice Department being corrupted, and you have parts of the intelligence community being corrupted, you really are. These are places where you put enormous power to protect the country and to protect the innocent. And if all of a sudden they start being politically corrupted, you really have an enormous challenge in terms of freedom and the rights of your citizens.
Stay right there. We'll continue. Newt Gingrich is with us. By the way, he is teaching an online course about national security. It's called Defending America, and he's got it up on his website, defendingamericacourse.com, which, if you want to take a look at it, it is extremely enlightening. All right, as we continue, Newt Gingrich is with us. He's got a brand new course, by the way, that you can subscribe to. It's at defendingamericacourse.com. And, of course, Newt's book, Understanding Trump, has been on the New York Times bestseller list for like 3 months and running. Congratulations on that. Let me ask about the Republican Party and the Cassidy-Graham bill. I had Graham on yesterday, the day before I had Rand Paul on. Rand Paul is dead set against it. You know, to me, I want to see the devil being in the details. Instinctively, I like the idea of sending states the money and block granting things as a means of circumventing the waste, fraud, and abuse out of Washington. But I want to see I want to see the details. Your thoughts?
Well, I think, first of all, looking at the details when you're changing 1/5 of the American economy and life and death is totally legitimate. I think they are going to have a hearing early next week. But this may also be the best opportunity and the last opportunity in this round to profoundly change what has been a totally failed experiment with Obamacare. And you go around the country, you look at the pain that's being caused, you look at the cost to the patient, the cost to people buying insurance, the cost to doctors and hospitals. Obamacare is an absolute disaster, and in most states has turned out to be very expensive, to not work, and to offer people fewer and fewer and fewer choices. The number of counties that have either no insurance company or only one insurance company is really very sobering. And I think in that sense that Graham and Cassidy are to be commended. And Rick Santorum, who was a former senator, apparently played a key role in thinking this through and putting it together. And I think that they've done the country a real service.
You know, instinctively I like it because my attitude on it is assuming that states like California, New York, and Illinois that probably will go single-payered don't come back hat in hand 3 years later because they're bankrupt, and all the states that manage their money better. You know, the idea that governors and local officials are going to be the ones that have to respond to the citizens in their states is appealing to me. I also think right off the top, you probably get an additional 50 cents out of every dollar. But I do think other states are going to blow it. They're going to mismanage it, misappropriate it, and they're going to come back hat in hand. How important would it be to have a provision in there that says they can't? They get their...
I think it's very important to establish, and this is part of what Rand Paul has been trying to say, it's very important to establish real federalism, which is, yes, you get the freedom to experiment, but guess what? You own the experiment. You can't experiment and then come to us and say, oh, gee, that didn't work. I mean, Vermont tried to go single payer. They found they could not afford it. California tried to go single payer. They found it would take twice the budget, the entire state California budget. It would take twice that budget to pay for a single payer system, and they just collapsed. So I think you may be right. We might find occasionally some folks who have no sense at all who go out and try to do this. But I do think at the same time you're going to find that there are going to be states that take the freedom to create a market-oriented system that actually works and that lowers the cost of health care. I mean, we put into Medicare Part D a whole series of provisions for market effect, where people have real competition, they have real choice. You, the senior citizen on Part D, you're deciding which program you want. They have consistently come in under budget.
Yeah.
Because it turns out markets work, consumers work, bureaucrats fail, and big government fails.
Yeah. All right. Newt Gingrich, thank you, sir. We'll see you tonight on Hannity. We have big issues now facing this country. We've got 13 weeks to straighten this mess out. We'll take a quick break. We'll come back. We'll continue.